The snowstorm had been raging for 6 hours straight, and the wind screamed like a dying engine across the jagged cliffside. A single figure trudged upward through knee-deep snow, head bowed, a bulky pack strapped to his back and frost caking his beard. His name was Aven Hale, and he didn't know yet that he was being watched. High above, perched on a crystalline ledge that shimmered with alien minerals, stood a creature with a translucent blue carapace and 6-jointed limbs. Its name was Karthuun, mentor of the Seventh Circle, and it was not pleased. Subject Hale has deviated from the designated path, Karthuun muttered in a low vibration, speaking into a communicator embedded in its thorax. A voice buzzed back. Adjust the terrain. Initiate sequence 3. He must confront the avalanche within the next quarter cycle. Karthuun turned its gaze back to the lone human. So be it. 2 kilometers west, an array of seismic disruptors buried deep in the snow pulsed once, then again. The slope shuddered. Aven paused as the earth beneath him groaned. He looked up. A wall of snow at least 30 meters high broke loose from its perch. It moved with terrifying speed. Ah, hell. He dropped his pack and sprinted sideways along the slope, boots slipping on the icy terrain. The avalanche roared louder, a freight train of fury barreling down. Aven leapt behind a boulder just as the first wave of snow slammed into the mountainside, sending a spray of ice shards into the air. He curled into himself, arms over his head, as the world turned white when the snow settled. Aven was buried waist deep but alive. He coughed, spat out ice, and began digging. Karthuun observed from above, unimpressed. Later, as night fell and temperatures plummeted below -40, Aven finally stopped walking. He'd lost his pack during the avalanche, and his thermal suit was beginning to fail. He clenched his jaw and scanned the area. No trees, no rocks, just endless snow and the occasional jagged outcrop. Fine, he muttered. Let's do this. He knelt, scooping snow into a rough mound. With slow, deliberate motions, he began carving blocks. It took him over an hour to build the basic dome, but he wasn't done. He retrieved a folded mylar sheet from his emergency belt, then began lining the inner wall. From his boot, he pulled a narrow copper coil and carefully drove it into the snow floor. Karthuun blinked slowly, puzzled. What is he doing now? Aven connected the coil to a small battery cell embedded in his glove. The copper began to warm. He adjusted the airflow hole at the top of the igloo, then crawled inside, sealing the entrance with a final block. Within minutes, the interior temperature began rising. Inside, Aven exhaled slowly, his breath no longer visible. He rubbed his hands together and leaned back against the curved wall. Not bad, he murmured. Karthuun stared in silence. The next morning, the dome was still standing. Not only had it survived the night, but the snow around it had partially melted and refrozen in a hardened shell. Aven emerged, eyes squinting against the glare. Karthuun descended. Its 6 limbs touched down in the snow with a delicate patter. Aven didn't flinch. He watched the alien approach, arms crossed. You issued the avalanche, didn't you? He asked. Karthuun studied him. You were told this was a test of resilience. Your species accepted. I was told it was a cultural exchange initiative. Semantics. Aven snorted. You tried to kill me. No, Karthuun corrected. I attempted to evaluate your species' adaptability under extreme duress. Well, consider me evaluated. Karthuun circled the igloo, peering inside. This structure is primitive, yet effective. The use of latent body heat and embedded conductor coils is inventive. It's what we do, said Aven. Adapt, improvise. Most other species perished in the first phase. You ran this test before. 17 times, Aven frowned. What happened to the others? Frozen remains were collected and studied. Some attempted to dig downward. One tried to consume the snow for hydration and died of electrolyte imbalance. Aven raised an eyebrow. You watched them die. I monitored their physiological decline. That's not the same thing. Karthuun tilted its head. You are injured. Aven glanced down. His left wrist had swollen overnight, the skin under his glove purple and tight. Fell during the run from the avalanche, he said. Didn't notice until now. Karthuun extended a limb. Permit me. Aven hesitated, then held out his wrist. Karthuun scanned it with a handheld analyzer. Fracture. Minor. No dislocation. Good news. You require immobilization. I'll splint it myself, unnecessary. Karthuun reached into a compartment and withdrew a small brace which it fastened around Aven's wrist. The pain dulled almost instantly. Thanks, Aven muttered. I do not wish for you to expire before the final phase. Aven's eyes narrowed. Final phase, Karthuun pointed a limb toward the horizon. A transport will retrieve you in 2 days. Until then, you must remain within the test perimeter. And what is the final phase, survival? Aven sighed. Of course it is. That night, the temperature dropped even lower and gale-force winds whipped across the plain. Aven remained inside the igloo, carefully rationing the heat by adjusting the power feed to the copper coil. He melted snow in a small pan, sipped the lukewarm water, and wrapped his injured wrist tightly to avoid jostling it. Sleep came in short fits. The next morning, he heard movement outside. Not the wind. Steps. Slow, deliberate. He crawled to the entrance and peered out. 2 alien figures approached, both clad in reflective armor. One carried a long staff tipped with a glowing orb. The other dragged a slate-like device behind it. Aven stood up, wary. Friends of yours? He asked Karthuun, who had been silently observing from atop the ridge. They are observers, said Karthuun. They requested to study the human survivor. The taller of the 2 aliens stopped a few feet from Aven's igloo and tapped the orb to the ground. A pulse of energy rippled outward, scanning the structure. This is your shelter, the alien asked in a husky tone. Built it myself, Aven said, with ease. The second alien asked, more or less. The 2 aliens conferred briefly, then the first spoke again. We would like to challenge you. Aven blinked. Challenge me how? To a shelter-building contest during the next avalanche. Aven stared at them. You want me to build another igloo while escaping another avalanche? Yes, he looked at Karthuun. You're just letting this happen, Karthuun's gaze met his. You accepted the terms of the initial evaluation. Additional challenges fall within the expanded clause. Of course they do. The 2 aliens stepped back, then pointed toward a distant slope. There, said the taller one. The next avalanche will begin in 20 minutes. You have until then to prepare. Aven sighed, then began packing snow. Aven drove the flat of his hand down into the snowpack, shaping a new block with quick, practiced motions. The light was harsher now, the sun reflecting off the slope's crusty surface in a way that made his eyes water. He paused only to tug down the tinted visor on his helmet, then kept cutting. Across from him, the 2 challengers, shorter now without their environmental suits, had begun assembling a skeletal shelter framework, using long, whip-thin rods that seemed to sprout from their own arms. The rods clicked together with eerie synchronicity, forming a spindly dome that shimmered faintly in the cold air. Aven glanced at their structure once, then kept working. The snow here packed differently than the slope where he'd built the first igloo drier, more granular. He adjusted his technique, compressing each block by hand before setting it. His fingers throbbed. The fracture in his wrist flared with each movement, and the brace, while helpful, didn't stop the pain from climbing higher into his forearm. He didn't stop. A low chime echoed across the valley. 15 minutes until impact, the shorter alien said, its voice filtered through a translator box that buzzed faintly. Nice of you to give a heads up, Aven muttered. Karthuun descended again, landing with a crisp crunch of snow. It didn't speak, it watched. The aliens continued their assembly, attaching strips of reflective material atop their glimmering frame. As each strip locked into place, the structure began to pulse faintly, as if responding to some internal rhythm. You planning on hiding under that or praying to it? Aven called out. The taller alien didn't look up. Our shelter absorbs kinetic energy and redistributes it as thermal vibration. Your method relies on compression. Yeah, and not dying, that's the main feature. He returned to shaping the last curve of his dome. His breath came in short bursts now, and his left hand had lost most of its grip strength. He switched to using his elbow when pressing blocks into place. A soft, rhythmic vibration began underfoot. Karthuun turned toward the slope without comment and extended one limb into the air. The signal to trigger the avalanche had already been sent. Aven dropped to his knees and sealed the final gap at the top of his dome with a wedge-shaped piece. He crawled inside, dragging his pack with him. The new shelter was smaller than the first, hastily built, but he'd managed to line it with scavenged foil from his glove lining and had buried the copper coil deeper to maximize radiant heat through the floor. He switched it on with a flick. Outside, the slope cracked like thunder. He felt the rush before he heard a change in air pressure, a tremor that seemed to vibrate his teeth loose. Then sound came like 1,000 drums rolled across the mountainside. The igloo groaned as the snow slammed into it. Pressure built instantly. He braced his back against the curved wall, one foot planted against the opposite side, arms forming a triangle over his head. The structure held. He counted seconds. 30, then 50, then over 100 passed in muffled chaos. When the roar finally faded, it was replaced with a tight, oppressive silence. Aven waited another minute before tapping the inner surface of the dome. No give. He was buried deep. He dug toward the entrance tunnel, which had partially collapsed. Every movement sent a jolt through his wrist. By the time he broke through to open air, his entire left side was slick with sweat and his right leg was cramping. Outside, the alien shelter had vanished. He blinked, then moved closer, scanning the area. Where a sudden hiss of compressed air sounded and the alien dome unfolded like a flower from beneath the snow. The two challengers emerged, completely unscathed. The taller one removed its visor. Minimal displacement, efficient energy redirection. The shorter nodded. Thermal regulation reached optimal balance. Internal temperature maintained at 37 degrees. Aven sat down in the snow, panting. Yeah, well, mine didn't collapse. Yours did not vibrate. Why would I want it to vibrate? Vibration diffuses external force. Right. So does being buried under 3 meters of snow. Pretty sure that diffuses things too. Karthuun advanced between them. The challenge is concluded. Both shelters are intact. Results inconclusive. Inconclusive. Aven rubbed his temple with his good hand. I just pulled a second igloo out of a hat in under 20 minutes with a busted wrist. That's gotta count for something. You demonstrated improvisational resilience. They demonstrated technological precision. The test did not establish superiority. The shorter alien turned toward Karthuun. We request an auxiliary trial. No, Aven said flatly. No more trials. I still have snow in my ears and something's clicking in my shoulder. You may decline, said Karthuun. However, refusal will be noted in your evaluation. Aven tilted his head back and laughed once, bitter and short. Of course it will. The taller alien stepped forward. We propose a survival exchange. You will be given a device of our design. We will survive using one of your tools. Aven narrowed his eyes. You want to swap gear? Yes, we will take your heat coil. You will take our stabilizer. He opened his mouth to protest, then paused. All right, fine, but I keep my gloves. Accepted. They exchanged items. The alien stabilizer was a smooth, ovoid pendant that pulsed faintly when touched. Aven clipped it to his collar and felt a subtle vibration shift through his chest. Not unpleasant, just odd. The two aliens examined the copper coil curiously before setting it in the snow and huddling beside it. Karthuun turned and began ascending the ridge again, evidently satisfied. Aven sat still for a long while, letting the vibration of the stabilizer sink into him. His fingers were starting to go numb again, and the ache in his wrist had returned with a dull persistence that made his stomach churn. He flexed the fingers experimentally. His ring finger refused to move. He stood slowly, then made his way back to his pack. Inside, he had medical sealant, a thermal blanket, and a single dose of muscle relaxant. He took the relaxant dry and wrapped the blanket around his shoulders. The aliens, meanwhile, had begun to dig into the snow and build small mounds around the copper coil, trying to trap the heat. 3 hours passed by then. Aven had built a new windbreak using hard, packed snow and huddled behind it, eyes on the horizon. The wind was rising again. The shorter alien approached him, its posture unusually stiff. We are experiencing thermal irregularities. Aven didn't look up. Yeah, that's what happens when you bury a coil in the snow without insulation. The alien hesitated. You did not specify that requirement. You didn't ask. It turned away without replying. Another hour passed. The temperature dropped again and the wind started to howl. Aven's stabilizer kept his core temperature stable, but the rest of his body felt like it was encased in ice. He buried himself deeper in the snow mound and waited. By dusk, the alien shelter had partially collapsed. The coil had burned through its charge. The two challengers stood beside it, motionless. Aven approached them cautiously. "You all right?" The taller one nodded once. "We concede. Your device lacked longevity. However, we failed to account for its limitations. Your survival approach demands constant adjustment. That's how we do it, one problem at a time." The shorter alien turned back toward Karthuun, who was still watching from a nearby ridge, completely motionless. "We request return transport." "Granted." Aven turned away as the aliens vanished into a column of light. A moment later, Karthuun floated down beside him. "You are now the sole remaining subject." Aven didn't answer. He sat down in the snow and pressed the stabilizer pendant once, letting its warmth hum through his ribcage. "Any other surprise tests coming?" he asked. "No, there will be a debriefing in 20 hours. Then extraction." Aven leaned back and closed his eyes. "Good. Wake me if the mountain explodes." By the time the retrieval beacon lit up against the pale morning sky, Aven had been awake for hours. He sat half buried in the snowbank, legs tucked under the emergency blanket, jaw clenched as he tried to coax feeling back into his fingers. The stabilizer pendant still pulsed faintly under his collar, but it didn't reach his extremities anymore. He'd pushed it too far the night before, trying to warm melted snow for drinking. It had drained almost dry and now ran on flickers. He flexed his left wrist cautiously. Still swollen, the brace stiffened against the movement. Every nerve in his hand screamed. He lowered it into his lap and breathed through his teeth. Footsteps approached, crunching, deliberate. They didn't sound like Karthuun's. Aven didn't move. He'd learned not to waste energy on dramatics. The figure that crested the ridge was unlike any of the previous aliens. Taller than Karthuun, with a rough hide of overlapping plates like dulled obsidian, it moved with the slow certainty of something that had never once hurried. Its face was a flat oval, with a cluster of dim lights set where a mouth might have been. It wore no suit, no translator device. Aven squinted up at it. "You here to declare another contest?" The being regarded him in silence for several seconds. Then a voice entered Aven's head, not spoken, not heard. "Just there, you are the last subject. The others have withdrawn." Aven coughed once, wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Yeah, I noticed. They don't handle disappointment well, do they? They do not understand your methods." "That's mutual." The being's lights flickered. "You constructed shelter in under ideal time, using broken tools and physical impairment. You modified energy dispersal patterns with dead organic material. You resisted hypothermia using a device never calibrated for your species." Why? Aven blinked up at the sky, then looked back at the being. "Because I didn't want to die. That answer is insufficient, maybe to you." He shifted his weight, winced. "But it's the only one that mattered at the time. You responded to lethal conditions with minimal hesitation. Other species waited for extraction. Some attempted diplomacy. One tried to replicate our snow composition. Sounds like a terrible idea. It was." Their internal organs ruptured. Aven exhaled sharply through his nose. "Yeah, that tracks." The being approached, each step sending a small tremor through the crusted snow. When it stopped, it lowered a limb toward Aven's wrist. He flinched back. "You are damaged." "No kidding. Allow interface. I will reset the bone." Aven hesitated, then extended his arm. "You break it worse, and I'm biting whatever passes for your hand." The being's limbs split into 3 delicate extensions, which wrapped around his wrist without pressure. A sudden warmth passed through his skin, then a sharp crunch. Aven doubled forward with a groan, gritting his teeth against the pain. Then it was gone. He flexed his fingers again. They moved, no burning, no stiffness, just soreness like a muscle long overused. "I don't suppose you do full-body massages." "No, didn't think so." The being stepped back. "You have passed all metrics. Your species will be removed from the experimental bracket and reassigned to adaptive classification. Glad to be rebranded. You are permitted one request before departure. The others will not intervene." Aven raised an eyebrow. One, he thought for a moment, then adjusted the blanket over his knees. "I want firewood." "Explain." "Something to burn." something that crackles, something that smells like Earth. You've got all these machines and glowing pendants and kinetic domes, great stuff, but none of it feels real. I want fire, real fire. The being was silent for several long seconds, accepted. It lifted one arm toward the sky. A faint hum rippled through the air. Moments later, a capsule descended from above, kicking up a flurry of snow as it touched down gently beside Aven. Inside, stacked neatly, were several lengths of dry wood, a flint kit, and a small iron kettle. Aven laughed once, not a bark, not bitter, just amused. You actually did it. You brought me a campfire kit. Your request was simple. Your species often is. Thanks. I guess. He reached for the flint. The being turned, beginning its ascent back toward the ridge. Hey, Aven called after it. What's your name, Jerian? Well, Jerian, tell your mentors we're not trying to win these contests. We're just trying to get through them. Jerian paused, then continued walking. By late afternoon, Aven had a fire going. The wood burned slow and low, and the scent of pine filled the air. Someone on the retrieval crew must have done their homework. He boiled a bit of snow in the kettle, added the last of his rationed tea leaves, and leaned back against the snowbank. Karthuun arrived just before dusk. You have concluded your testing, it said without preamble. Yeah, said Aven, sipping the tea. Even got a souvenir fire. Karthuun studied the flames. Primitive combustion, comforting combustion. There are more efficient heating systems. Efficiency's not the point. He set the cup down. You ever sit by a fire, just sit. Watch it move. I do not require heat. You ever listen to wood pop when it splits? No, then you wouldn't get it. Karthuun remained still for a moment. You spoke with Jerian. Yeah, he's strange but fair. He is not a mentor, he is a final evaluator. His presence indicates the end of a cycle. Aven looked up. You mean this whole thing's over, for now? Your performance will redefine the parameters for future exchanges with humanity. Good. Maybe next time you'll start with a conversation instead of an avalanche. That is unlikely. Aven snorted, then stoked the fire with a stick. You ever think we're not the confusing ones? Karthuun didn't answer. By nightfall, the retrieval vessel arrived. It didn't descend with ceremony, just a steady hum and a ramp unfolding into the snow. Aven stood slowly, knees popping, wrist still tender but working. He turned back toward the fire, now a bed of glowing coals. Don't suppose you'll let me take it with me? No, said Karthuun. Open flame is prohibited aboard all vessels. Figures. He turned away, stepping onto the ramp. Halfway up, he looked back. You know, he said, you keep throwing survival puzzles at us, but we've been doing this kind of thing since we learned how to walk upright. You think we're stubborn because we don't quit, but the truth is, we're just used to things going wrong. Karthuun didn't respond. Aven shrugged. Maybe next time, try offering us a blanket and a cup of tea. You might get better results. Then he entered the ship. The ramp folded behind him, sealing the cold mountain plateau out of sight. The fire crackled once more in the fading light, then dimmed, unattended, and the snow at last stopped falling.